Welcome everyone to our U.S. House District 3 Candidates Climate Forum. Hi, I'm Yang Toledo. I come from the Diné Nations and I am a leader of Yucca's Actions, who is the host of today's forum. I am a proud member of the 2020 graduating class and I am going to Fort Lewis in the spring. I'm excited to be a first-time voter in this year's election.
Hi, I'm Seneca Johnson, another leader of Yucca Action. I'm also a proud member of the graduating class of 2020, and I'm headed to Yale University in the fall. I'm also excited to be a first-time voter in this year's election.
And I'm Artemisio Romero Carver. I'm an incoming senior at the New Mexico School for the Arts. On behalf of the whole Yucca Steering Committee, thank you so much for being here. As you might know, Yucca stands for Youth United for Climate Crisis Action. We're young people from communities throughout northern New Mexico who are protecting our communities and our futures, but demanding urgent action on climate crisis. One important aspect of our work is holding elected officials accountable. That work starts with being actively involved in elections. Yucca Action is RC4 that we launched earlier this year. We published a Climate Voters Guide this week, and today we're hosting candidates forums for two key New Mexico House District races and the District 3 congressional race. Please check out our voters guide before you cast your ballots. You can find it and these forms to share as well as our PRC forum on our website, www.yuccaaction.org.
We are extremely excited that you are all joining us, and we are very grateful to our candidates for taking the time in the last leg of their campaign to consider important questions about the climate crisis and share with voters what they plan to do. The COVID-19 crisis has presented great challenges for our communities and our economy. It has also meant unthinkable tragedy for those who have lost loved ones and are still grieving. We know that in the midst of all this, our communities are struggling to engage in political decision-making processes and the upcoming elections. But it is all the more crucial that we stay engaged and ensure that decisions about relief spending, budget cuts, and planning for recovery and transition includes the voices of our communities and center the needs and the visions of those most directly impacted.
This is why Yucca, in the midst of our mutual aid efforts, is making sure to take the time to help our community members stay engaged with the elections. As you all know, the 2020 election was already going to be a defining moment for our climate movement. With the mandate from the world's leading scientists that the emissions must be reversed by 2030, we know that we have absolutely no time to spare. And even as the world is still reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic, the weather is warming up, and we are faced with the threat of drought, wildfires, heat waves, and hurricanes that will put even more people's safety and well-being at risk. We have an enormous opportunity and responsibility to rethink the way that our economy is structured, how resources are distributed, and how we care for one another and the earth. We need to rise to the occasion, and we need bold leadership that represents the voices and the will of our people.
Because we are young people in northern New Mexico, we have chosen races on our communities to put spotlights on. One of the largest and hottest races on the primary ballot this year is for the 3rd Congressional District in New Mexico. Spanning most of northern New Mexico, this race has a large slate of candidates vying for this seat to replace Ben Ray Luján, who is leaving this seat to run for Senate. New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District includes San Juan, Rio Arriba, Los Alamos, Taos, Colfax, Harding, Union, Mora, San Miguel, Quay, Quay, and Roosevelt Counties. It also contains most of Santa Fe, McKinley and Sandoval Counties, as well as parts of Bernalillo County. Joining us for today's forum is Teresa Leger de Fernandez, Kyle Tisdale, Marco Serna, and Joseph Sanchez. The other candidates in the race did not respond to our invitations. We need strong representation in Congress to help us fight for legislation like the Green New Deal and to fight for our economic and social justice and any COVID-19 recovery plans. We are honored to have these 4 candidates here and grateful that they took the time to share their vision and plans to transition our country's economy off of fossil fuels and how they would work to protect our communities and the environment if elected. Each candidate was given 2 minutes of time to respond to each question.
So without further ado, let's hear the questions and responses from candidates.
Please introduce yourself. Where are you from? What have you been working on? And why do you think you are the right person to represent New Mexicans in Congress?
Hi, my name is Kyle Tisdale. I'm a Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress in New Mexico's 3rd District. Let me start by thanking Yucca for holding this forum and for creating some accountability in this election and in our politics here in New Mexico. I am a public interest environmental attorney and live with my family here in Taos. I've spent my career fighting on behalf of people and communities living in the shadow of fossil fuel exploitation and holding our federal government accountable to the science and the timeline of the climate crisis. Here in New Mexico, that work has included being the lead attorney in fighting to protect the Greater Chaco landscape. I've protected tens of thousands of acres in the Santa Fe National Forest from oil and gas leasing. And I've represented Dene and citizens groups in the Four Corners and fighting for a just transition away from coal-fired generation in the Four Corners. I'm running for office because I think this election represents the last best chance that we have to preserve a livable planet. And we need politicians that are not afraid to take on the federal government or the fossil fuel industry and to fight for the type of change that we need to secure a livable planet for our children and future generations. My background as an attorney has demonstrated that I am willing to take that fight on. And if we want a different type of politics, we need to start to elect different types of politicians. And I am called by that sense of service to this election. And that is why I am running and fighting for that type of change that we need to see.
Hello, I'm Teresa Ledger Fernandez, and I am wanting to be your Congresswoman on a platform of protecting what we love, because everything we love is under attack, including our planet, including our future, because we do not have the healthcare, the education, the jobs that we need. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Las Vegas, New Mexico, in one of those wonderful big families. My parents were educators. My dad remembered, though, what it was like when they took the cattle to the market and no dogs or Mexicans were allowed in the restaurants. And my mom remembers what it was like when she was punished for speaking Spanish in the playground. I have followed their example of fighting to address these inequities throughout my life. I was lucky in that I got to be in the very first Head Start class in Las Vegas. I went away to Yale and then found my voice at Stanford Law School, where I was trained as a rebellious lawyer. And what a rebellious lawyer does is listen. And I've been very fortunate because I have listened and been working in community here in New Mexico for decades. I've been working with the Native American tribes on issues from protecting the environment, protecting cultural sites, to economic development. I have been helping get affordable housing on the ground, working with acequias, working on voting rights issues. I bring to this race a deep knowledge of the issues our communities face, but also the federal level experience. I have 2 presidential appointments, one from Clinton and one from Obama, on the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation. This is one of the key ways in which our environmental laws and our look and see what does development do to us is played out, and I have that. So I often talk about saying, I know the Washington that matters to New Mexico, and I will take that to DC to be your voice.
Hi, everybody. Marco Cerna here. And first off, let me thank you all for taking this initiative with your community. It's always good to see our younger generation get involved in these types of races and address the important issues. So with that, thank you. My name is Marco Cerna. Again, I am the First Judicial District Attorney, which consists of Santa Fe, Rio Arriba, and Los Alamos counties. I focused my race as district attorney and my vision to address the opioid epidemic. I grew up, born and raised here in northern New Mexico, but grew up in Espanola, New Mexico, and have seen how that's ravished our community. I wanted to address it head on as district attorney, so we're addressing the addiction issue with diversion programs, making sure that we're treating people like people, keeping them out of jail, and trying to get them into treatment as soon as humanly possible. Because if you've ever dealt with addiction or known of somebody who has dealt with addiction, you know that hitting it head on is what you need to do. I bring that same passion to the rest of the district in not only addressing the opioid epidemic, but also addressing economic development in rural communities. My parents have a small business in Espanola that has had difficult times when large corporations and Amazon came in. Healthcare, we need affordable quality healthcare. It's a right, not a privilege, but also we need access to affordable quality healthcare. Excuse me. Climate change, I know as several of your questions will be about climate change. We need to address that in a responsible manner. And also our veteran services need to be improved as well as our education system. But with that, I look forward to answering the questions, and thank you again for having this forum.
Hi there, my name is Joseph Sanchez. I'm running for Congress. I'm currently a state representative for District 40. I represent 4 counties right in the middle of CD3. I was born and raised in the Espanola Valley. I'm a graduate of Espanola Valley High School. I went on to get my bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from UNM. I have my master's in business administration from New Mexico State University. I was an engineering manager at Los Alamos. I was the former CEO of Jemez Mountains Electric, the largest electric co-op in the state with over 30,000 customers. That's a little bit about my background. Why am I running for Congress? As a state rep, I was able to do a lot of good things for my 4 counties, my district, and for the state. I see this as an opportunity to do a lot more for the district, our state, and the country. A little bit about my background. When I was running the co-op, I was pushing what would have been the largest solar array in the state. For any co-op, it was going to be a 7.5 megawatt array. I have some big plans for our state. If successful, I really want to push a utility storage center for the whole Southwest up in the Four Corners area where we're about to shut down that coal plant. I think that'd be a major step in the right direction. Regarding the new Green Deal, I like its ideas. There's some things that I don't agree with, but climate change is real and we definitely need to make a major move in the direction. We need to start implementing technology and also figuring out how to phase off oil and gas in a realistic time frame. No one will be able to push renewable policy or energy policy in a positive manner like I can with my background, education, experience. I know how rates work. Thank you. Have a great day.
"2020 is a critical election year. What specifically motivated you to run for office? What is the vision that inspires you? And what are the changes that you are hoping to make?"
I actually wasn't intending on running when I first heard that Ben Ray Luján was vacating his seat to run for Senate. So because I love being district attorney, but I had individuals approach me, and these are all issues that I had been discussing as district attorney because it all kind of falls under that same umbrella, excuse me. Economic issues, lack of education funding, lack of job opportunity, lack of healthcare and mental health services. These all sort of fall under the purview when we're dealing with individuals in our community in my position. And so I really thought about it and discussed it with my parents and focused on economic development, climate change responsibly, and how that would affect New Mexico, because New Mexico is different than so many other states in this union. So I believe that I'm the best candidate to do so because I've dedicated my life to public service, because I was brought up with the idea that lifting up your community is the best cause you can take. And as I've been on the front lines as a leader with my office in the opioid epidemic, now during COVID pandemic, I've been on the front lines giving safety kits, COVID safety kits to the Navajo Nation, actually driving out there to the Navajo Nation. That's what I bring, and that's some of the change that I bring that you don't see with many candidates and many electeds that are making those efforts. In addition to that, I believe that I bring a sense of pragmatism to the job and position, which will help in crossing the aisle to discuss important issues and actually making change so that both parties aren't constantly butting heads. And I hope to do so as your future congressman.
So 2020 is a critical election year. This is an election that will not only determine the future of our democracy, but very well may determine the future of our planet. I have not built my career or aspired to become a politician, and that is not what motivates me or my decision to run for office. I am a father of 3 kids, and I have spent a lot of time thinking about their future and the planet that they are going to inherit. And if there's anything that needs to motivate us in this moment, it is fighting for that future. And to bring that on, it will require a fundamental transformation. It is not enough to just reduce our emissions. We have got to transform our energy systems, our economy, our financial institutions, and the way money is invested and spent in this country. And all of that has to be founded on principles of justice and equity, and making sure that we are addressing the historic inequities that exist in communities that have been sacrifice zones. And that is what inspires me in this election. That is why I am running for office. It is not for my own sort of personal aspirations or power, or to join fancy Washington, D.C. cocktail parties. It is to bring that type of voice for change into Congress and fight on behalf of future generations every single day.
2020 is an incredibly critical year. When I was allowed to go out and meet with people, I said that 2020 is going to be like those thunderclouds that roll through our sky. We go from having this beautiful turquoise sky to thunderclouds that come in and they roll and they bring rain and they bring nourishment and they wash away the bad. That 2020 is the year that we change our president and we bring in a new set of hope and inspiration. My father, the Senator Ray Luján, said when things needed to get done, and he did some great things, he said, ahora es cuando, it's time now to take the bold and courageous action to address the inequities in our system, to address the climate crisis, to address the fact that we don't have healthcare, education, and the things we need to thrive as a community. So I have answered that call to say, ahora es time now. I want to accomplish the things that make our community stronger. I am a person of community. I've worked in community, and you will hear me use those terms a lot throughout my campaign. I believe that government has an obligation to create the foundation upon which we can thrive, our businesses can thrive, our families can thrive, our schools can thrive. And that is what I want to work towards. I'm going to give you an example. I've been working with HomeWise. We had our 5,000th homeowner this summer. She was fleeing domestic violence, living in a car. She walked into a home of her own and she said, my heart is bursting with happiness. I think that government should work to build the foundation so that more angels, her name was Angel, can walk into a home of her own and have their heart burst with happiness. I want to try to create that kind of vibrant, thriving communities here in New Mexico and across the country.
Who is your constituency? Whose voices will you carry to Washington?
So, as a public interest environmental attorney, my successes have not just been in federal court. They have been a part of campaigns that have built power from the ground up. They necessarily include organizing and meeting in communities that are impacted by fossil fuel exploitation. It involves information sharing and information gathering and an open discourse with the communities that are impacted and a whole coalition of organizations that are engaged in that work. And so while a lot of that work might end in a federal court win, lasting change can't just be in the courtroom alone, and it can't just be in the halls of Congress alone with some new policy or some new piece of legislation. That power for change is built from the ground up, and that will be my organizing principle in Washington, D.C. It is not going to include an open door policy with the public. It is going to be the active engagement within the communities of the 3rd Congressional District and around the country that are fighting for lasting, fundamental transformation that we desperately need in this moment. And that is how we build a movement for change. It is not from a top-down approach. It is from building power within our communities from the ground up. And that is how we will secure the type of just transition and the transformation that we so desperately need in this moment.
What you get when you elect me as your Congresswoman is somebody who has worked with the diverse communities across this district. So I'm from the east side of the mountains. You know, I have ranch and farmland that my nephew is preparing for regenerative agriculture, I'd like to say. But, you know, I was flipping hamburgers at my Theo's rodeo. So I know the issues of ranchers and farmers. I've worked with Native Americans. I've worked on Latino civil rights issues, both here in New Mexico and nationally with the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. I have walked in almost every kind of community that you can imagine in this district. And I'll be bringing that deep knowledge of each of these constituencies with me to DC. That is why my campaign is called Teresa for All, because I truly believe that I must be able to represent the entire district. And I will say, here in Santa Fe, I have worked here as well on issues that we care about. I am a voting rights expert. I fight gerrymandering. I fight for increased access to the ballot. And I'm the one who took to the Supreme Court the need to allow us to have ranked choice voting, which is a better form of democracy. Democracy is great, but we always know that we need to be working on it all the time. So I would ask you all to go and read the New Mexican endorsement of me, because they say that in beautiful ways. They say, Teresa brings a strong understanding of this district, not as a campaign stop, but because of her life's work. And that's what I'll be taking with me to DC. The other thing that I'm really proud of is the Santa Fe Reporter, when they said I have one of the most inspiring campaigns they've ever seen. Please go read those.
I've actually received this question as district attorney and who the constituency is, especially with the party system. But everybody in the district, but also it expands to the state, and in this particular case, with this position, the entire country. You want to represent everybody as best as you can. Will we disagree on certain issues? We will, and that's okay. But again, what I bring to this race is a level head. I'm willing to have those tough discussions and say, hey, we may disagree or we may agree on this particular issue, but let's try to work and move forward in a productive, meaningful, and respectful manner. Specifically, I would try to bring as much money to New Mexico, try to address the issues which the Green New Deal, which I know is a huge issue across the country, but the Green New Deal would affect New Mexico adversely and more adversely than other states. So I bring that sense of addressing the issue in a responsible manner, agreeing with our current governor and legislature to allow a 30-year process to usher out fossil fuel reliance and really invest in clean new technologies like wind, like solar, because New Mexico can become a lead producer in energy production, clean energy production in this country. If you drive from Clovis, New Mexico to Amarillo, Texas, you will see, once you pass the state line, you'll see thousands, tens of thousands of wind turbines going into Amarillo for 70 miles. They are the lead producer of wind energy. Why can't we become, if not the lead, one of the lead producers? Same thing for solar. We can create meaningful, viable jobs that are long-lasting if we become producers of this type of energy.
We all know that there are more than 20 times the number of lobbyists on the Hill than representatives, and that the fossil fuel lobby is one of the most powerful forces in Washington. What is your strategy to fight against the corporate control of our government and the corporate influences over your policymaking?
This question is extremely relevant considering the recent development of dark money coming in through the Teresa Ledger campaign, which she is not recognizing and is denying the fact. But I actually saw a disgusting ad against one of my opponents, Valerie Plame, with that dark money, attacking her. Which this is exactly why we need finance reform in politics. We need to do away with Citizens United because you get these special interest groups that we don't know who she's indebted to have this money come in to the race and why they're attacking. I hope I'm not next on the chopping block because the ad was absolutely scathing, disgusting, and immoral in my opinion. With that, I have created a pledge to get dark money out of politics. We're better than that here in New Mexico, and we've always been good Democrats not accepting that type of help. And I hope that she denounces those groups before they spend all their money. It's no use in saying I am against dark money coming into New Mexico after they've spent the $700,000 that they're going to spend on this race. But with that, when it comes to lobbyists, I've always been a very straight shooter, and I'm holding myself accountable to you all, the voter, with detailed position papers on where I stand. So you know exactly where I'm going with my position, my policy views, and if I change my messaging, guess what? You get to call me out and say, you published these position papers, and now you're going against that. And that's exactly why I did it, to make sure that you as the voter know where I stand and why. Like I've said, we may disagree on certain issues, but I can guarantee you we will agree on majority of the issues.
My strategy to fight against corporate control of our government is based in my own history of fighting for democracy issues. This is the first time I've run for office in electoral politics. I'm very thankful to all the people who make our electoral politics work, our democracy work. But what I've been doing before this is working on what I call democracy work. So I've been endorsed by End Citizens United, by Let America Vote, and by other organizations like Working Families who know that it is very important that we make Congress and all of our elected officials work for the people. It is not right. Corporations are not people, and we need to say that out front, and we need to change Citizens United, and there are many ways to do that. The End Citizens United coalition that I'm going to be working with, we will work hard on doing this. I've also been endorsed by the Progressive Caucus. When you look at who are the members of the Progressive Caucus, oh my goodness, it includes Jamie Raskin, Deb Haaland, but also civil rights leaders that, wow. And I'm going to be joining with them to address these issues, to say the people's voice is what matters. I am not taking any corporate PAC money. I always jokes like, what corporation would want to support me given my lifelong work and the kind of stuff that I have been doing? But I have taken the pledge to not take any corporate PAC money. So I am going to be listening to you. I'm going to be listening to the amazing people on the ground who are experts in their field. I love to say that the experts are those who have knowledge, and sometimes that knowledge isn't because you have a PhD, it's because you've been in community and you know what matters. Those are the kinds of experts that I'll be listening to.
So money and influence in politics is not only threatening the very fabric of our democracy, but it is actively working against the type of fundamental change that we need to see. The reason we don't have common sense gun control is because of the influence of the NRA. The reason we don't have climate legislation that is operating on the timeline of the climate crisis is because of the fossil fuel interests that are dominating our politics. That both has to do with campaign finance. So we need campaign finance reform to get that money out of politics. But we also need politicians who are willing to champion that type of change. And if we want a different type of politics, we need to start electing different type of politicians, and politicians who are willing to take on that fight. I've spent my career suing the federal government in federal court and taking on the fossil fuel interests in court and winning. And we need that type of bold, fundamental leadership transformation if we're going to get the type of legislation and the type of policy transformation that we need. And it has to start by returning power to the people and away from this plutocracy where the most wealthy corporations and individuals control our politics from the top down. We need fundamental change, and we need to do that within a system that gets rid of that type of outsized influence.
What political changes would you make to protect our communities from the climate crisis and prevent ecological collapse?
So because we have collectively failed to take action on the climate crisis, we are now in a situation where emissions reductions alone are not going to be sufficient. We need to look at the intersectional nature of this crisis and address it from that broad sort of systems point of view. So it starts by holding the fossil fuel industry accountable for a legacy of exploitation. We can use that to help restore our landscapes, create jobs in our communities, end the cycle of sort of boom and bust economics that have driven communities that have been exploited. But we also will use that as sort of a 1-2 opportunity where we can help to deal with legacy pollution, but at the same time sort of restore our landscapes. We also need to be looking at things like agricultural policy so that subsidies don't just go to corporate farms in the Midwest, but go towards family farms here in New Mexico, where we can look at restoration agricultural practices, ways that we can sequester carbon through the types of industries and the plants that we grow. We can build, for example, hemp production on a scale that helps to restore our soils, but also helps to build resiliency within our communities and create those connections with localized food systems. And we also need to be looking at economic diversification and ways that we can move states like New Mexico away from this cycle of boom and bust economy, away from this sort of colonized approach that corporate interests have had in our state, towards a more diverse and equitable economy here in New Mexico.
This question is directly related to the Green New Deal and how that would affect New Mexico. I support fully the idea of the Green New Deal. I applaud AOC for such a robust bill in trying to get passed in our legislature. But what I can tell you is we need to do this responsibly. New Mexico relies, 40% of our budget relies on fossil fuel revenues. And if we were to eliminate that in 10 years without any proper infrastructure, we still don't have broadband throughout the state. I live in Santa Fe currently, and I don't have broadband in the capital city. So we need to first make sure that we're prepared to deal with ushering out the fossil fuel industry. With that, infrastructure is at the top of the list. We need to invest properly on infrastructure. Second, we need to invest in bringing in and subsidizing clean new technologies so that we can help these businesses get off the ground, provide the long-term jobs that I discussed earlier, and let's become a lead producer in clean energy. Now, we can still have the bold action that the Green New Deal states within that 10-year span. What we can do to help out New Mexico, though, is allow us 30 years
So I think that it is very important that we act urgently. And what I have been saying throughout my campaign is that we need to put a lens on every policy, funding, tax position the government takes, so that we are asking the question, is this exacerbating the existential climate crisis that we are facing? Is it making it worse, or is it providing a solution and creating opportunities? And I will apply that lens to everything, because you can't imagine the many different ways in which our planet is threatened. And so we have to say it has to apply to everything, not just one little area. I'd also say that I wrote quite a while back what a Green New Deal would look like for New Mexico, because I want to make sure, me, Justin Soren, and Beth Beloff wanted to make sure we understood what a Green New Deal for New Mexico to look like, so we could gain the support of the public for it. And we talked about, let's build the new Route 66, not for automobiles, but for clean energy. We have unrivaled wind resources in eastern New Mexico and solar in western New Mexico. Let's get that going. Let's establish a new Green Corps to train and employ people in cleaning up the mess and in installing renewables and building new systems to replenish groundwater, get clean water, clean air. Let's give power to the people by passing community solar. Let's create new grants to help farmers. Regenerative agriculture is going to help save us and feed us. Let's buy clean. We can make sure that the federal government only buys clean, and that will help a lot. We need to invest in green homes and offices, honor people transitioning out of fossil fuels, and create some prizes and energy around moving us to a new green world that saves our planet.
What do you think the connection is between the COVID-19 crisis and the climate crisis? If elected, how will you work to address some of the issues that we're seeing in terms of the impacts of a public health crisis?
Well, it's interesting how this is affecting our climate, considering all of the purchases of plastic goods, bottled water, Purell bottles, bottles to make your own hand sanitizer. All of these are being purchased at an abnormal rate due to the fact that people don't know if they're going to have to stay in their homes for a long period of time if we see another spike in the spread of the virus. In addition to that, we're seeing less people on the road, so less of an impact with the fossil fuel emissions as well as flights. But when we are allowed to go back to our daily activity, when there is a vaccine for the masses, we're going to see all of that come back in. So we need to really address those issues as they come. But in addition to that, with regard to the healthcare situation, I think this really shows the gaps that we have in our current healthcare system. I do believe and am in favor of expanding the Affordable Care Act. I believe it's the best option and most affordable option for hardworking families, because Medicare for all, it sounds wonderful, but every plan I saw, it's the taxpayers that would take the brunt of that cost, and I'm just not willing to put that weight on hardworking Americans, hardworking New Mexicans. I do believe that with the negotiation process of the Affordable Care Act and with pharmaceuticals, we can bring those down. We also see rural New Mexico is really affected by this. The Navajo Nation, most specifically, in not receiving the services that they need by our president. And the president of the nation, President Nez, had to file suit and get a judgment in order to get those services. That's unacceptable. We need to make sure that individuals get the services they need, regardless of where they are, a rural or a large city. And we also need to ensure that they have the proper testing when needed.
So the COVID-19 health crisis is obviously, we're in this sort of unprecedented global moment. What we know about the relationship between the climate crisis and the warming planet and things like this global health pandemic is that it makes these types of events more likely to occur. And the frequencies of these events, not only with respect to health crisis, but ecological impacts and natural disasters, it will make them more frequent and of greater intensity. And so what we're seeing play out in real time is the way that this health crisis is having an outsized impact on our communities that are already vulnerable. It is leading to outsized impacts on our pueblos and in our tribal communities and in particular the Navajo Nation. And part of that deals with the legacy of injustice and colonization and inequity with respect to policies of our federal government and state governments with respect to how those communities are set up to endure these type of crises. And so we need to see fundamental change that not only addresses those inequities, but uses this health crisis as a sort of a jumping off point to create the type of fundamental transformation that we need to see. And it is a system that takes these inequities seriously, that improves a safety net and fundamentally the way that we take care of people in this country is broken. And that is what needs to be addressed now and in the future in terms of this health crisis.
Our current economical system relies on the creation of sacrifice zones. Communities in our states and others have had to bear the burdens of health and environmental costs of the extractive industries that is funding our state budget. These communities have largely been indigenous and marginalizing communities. What will you do to put an end to environmental racism?
I've worked in some of the communities that have been most impacted by extractive industries. I have been so lucky to be with the Pueblo Laguna on their team for the last 30 years. As many of you know, the Pueblo Laguna had one of the largest open pit uranium mines in the country. The families that have been impacted by that uranium mining, the devastation in terms of health, in terms of future for those families is very difficult. We have so many Superfund sites in the state of New Mexico, not just from uranium, but for many other things. So this is something that I know well because I've been working on these issues for a long time. On behalf of the Pueblo of Laguna, I joined with the Pueblo of Zuni in fighting the Fence Lake coal mine, where we put on experts, as I talked earlier, who were experts in their cultural traditions. And that was such a beautiful thing to say, no, these are the people, court, you must listen to. But with regards to the impact now as we transition, I would support something like the 100% Clean Economy Act, because what does that act do? It invests in the transition from fossil fuel to wind and solar. It provides job training in new industries. It assists the local governments that are going to be impacted, because yes, the tribal governments are impacted, and so is the state. It would improve public health, especially in those rural communities that have been impacted and some of the not so rural communities that have been impacted. And for New Mexico, when they say we can't do it, it's better to have a planned transition to the new economy than being tackled like we were by the Russians that have devastated our budget.
So from the beginning of this campaign, I've been saying that New Mexico has operated as an energy colony for generations. Our state budget has literally been tied to the price of oil. The services that we are able to provide in our state literally rise and fall with that price of oil. We are seeing that really explicitly right now with the coronavirus and the way that that oil and gas prices have collapsed under that situation. And let's be clear that the burdens of that have disproportionately fallen on tribal and indigenous communities in this state. In the Four Corners area, our federal government has recognized this area as a sacrifice zone. despite the fact that there are 2 mine-to-mouth coal-fired power plants, a legacy of uranium mining, 40,000 historic oil and gas wells. Over 40% of homes on the Navajo Nation, lack running water, lack electricity. And so to change that, we need to address the historic inequities that exist. We need policies in place that not only cut through the red tape, but that allow these communities to transition and a just transition for the communities and the people that live there. Right now, there's really complicated issues that are going on with respect to Navajo Nation allotment owners and the fact that they derive a lot of revenue from further exploiting their lands and leasing their lands to oil and gas development. If we are going to end that legacy of exploitation, we need direct support to our communities and a way to boost our education and to boost the economic opportunities that exist. And that has to be from the ground up.
Well, first and foremost, we really need to focus on, again, coming up with a responsible plan to usher out the use of fossil fuels in this country and in our state, and invest in new clean technologies. If you allow oil and gas companies to invest in new pipelines and new infrastructures, well, that's not the proper way to handle this, because then there's more long-term use of fossil fuels. So we need to invest in clean new technologies and really focusing on those efforts in how we deal with the future of the energy that we will use and that our kids will use for generations to come. We need to also focus on the fact that a lot of these pipelines are going through indigenous lands because it's easier to go through them, and that's just not acceptable. We can't allow any corporation to take advantage of any type of sovereign nation, any type of local community the way that they have in the past. So I will focus on ensuring that these areas are protected and that we, again, responsibly start ushering out the fossil fuel industry from our production here in the U.S. and our consumption here in the U.S. and focus more on green new technologies, green energies, specifically here in New Mexico, which will help out with addressing our economic concerns, especially now that we're seeing a downturn in the prices of oil and gas.
What are your plans to transition our economy off of fossil fuels in the timeline scientists have given us? Will you co-sponsor the Green New Deal?
Yes, I would endorse, support, and co-sponsor the Green New Deal. Indeed, the people who are the original architects of the Green New Deal are supporting my campaign. I hope everybody knows that Representative Ocasio-Cortez, her Courage to Change, has endorsed me. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, many of whom are the original architects of the Green New Deal, have endorsed me, as I already mentioned, Deb Haaland. So I can't wait to get to DC to work with them on this. And when people say I can't be for the Green New Deal, what is it talking about? It's talking about addressing this crisis now and letting science guide us and letting the need to address the economic and the social injustices to fix them while we're addressing the climate crisis. Who can be against that? Who can be against that? And when we think about the costs that we will suffer if we do not address this issue now and address it with bold and courageous action, the costs are going to be so much greater, and the impact will be indeed on communities like New Mexico. Let's face it, we're at the front lines. We will become the Sonoran Desert. If anybody hasn't read Bill Dupree's book, you should do it. It is beautifully and scarily written because it talks about how we will become that Sonoran Desert if we don't take care of this and what will happen to our communities. We need to do it now so that we do not sacrifice our entire state and many other places to this climate crisis. So yes, I am for that. I don't know how many times I can say I am for the Green New Deal and the principles of an equity transition with justice and actually just creating a vibrant, thriving economy and community at its core.
Again, I really think that we need to address this climate crisis in a responsible manner. I love the idea of the Green New Deal. I love what it stands for, and I agree that we need to rely on that science. And we can still have bold change within our nation if we provide safeguards for states like New Mexico, where again, 40% of our revenue stream that we rely on, our budget, is based off of fossil fuels. So I agree with the current governor in our current legislature for their efforts in providing a responsible way for us to address the issue 30 years so that we can invest in broadband throughout the state, proper infrastructure throughout the state, water storage, which is huge here in New Mexico, to ensure that we can not only invest in the clean new energies of the future, but also invest in bringing other companies here to fill the gap of the fossil fuel revenue that we do get. Now, that being said, if in the Green New Deal they were to provide subsidies to New Mexican communities so that they don't completely get wiped off the map because they lose all their revenue source, I would be all for it. And I would sign it and I'd co-sponsor it in a heartbeat. But until that's done, I cannot support a plan that would devastate New Mexico's economy. We appreciated $930+ million additional funding to education, which allowed early childhood education, which we didn't have before. We lose all of that if we do this 10-year deal. And we lose a lot of the small towns that I know I grew up in a small town, and some of you may have grown up, in a small town. So as is, I can't support, but if we can make those changes, I'll support it in a heartbeat.
So the science and the timeline of the climate crisis essentially says that we need to cut our emissions in half in the next 10 years. And in the 10 years after that, we essentially need to totally decarbonize our economy. That is an incredibly short time frame for the fundamental transformation that we need to see. So the policies that we put in place and the way that we transition our economy has got to be around the managed decline of the fossil fuel industry. And the relationship between that economy and fossil fuels and our broader economic system that exists. So, the Green New Deal, what it does is, first and foremost, I would absolutely co-sponsor the Green New Deal and help to build out that legislation. But the oil and gas and coal that is extracted from our public lands account for almost 25% of all U.S. emissions. So this transition has to start with holding the fossil fuel industry accountable. And part of that is the legacy of the exploitation that exists on our public lands. Here in New Mexico alone, there is probably billions, if not tens of billions of dollars in legacy pollution that will fall to the shoulders of the taxpayers of our state if we don't hold industry accountable. So we need to hold them accountable to use that funding to help transition our economy and manage the decline of industry consistent with the timeline of the climate crisis, and use that funding to boost things like renewables and storage. We need to use that money to help transition our communities and our systems of education. And we need to look at this in terms of the intersectional nature of this and approach this from a health perspective, from an education perspective, and from a fossil fuel economy perspective.
What specific policy proposal would you like to work on to implement both the Green New Deal and a green economic recovery?
So as I've said before, the transition that we need to make, I think, has to start with the role that our federal government has in the exploitation and the perpetuation of the fossil fuel economy. As I said, 25% of emissions in this country annually come from oil, gas, and coal that's produced on our federal public lands. There's also over $20 billion a year in direct subsidies, and perhaps as much as $650 billion a year in direct and indirect subsidies combined. So we need specific policies to put in place to manage the decline of the fossil fuel economy. We've got to hold industry accountable to do that, but part of that is through things like full cost bonding to make sure that taxpayers aren't left footing the bill for the legacy of cleanup across this country that's probably to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. We also need to have greater transparency in the financial markets and the way that the financial industry has been footing the bill for the shale gas boom that has been going on in this country. And we need things like joint and several liability so that the fossil fuel industry cannot simply just sell off that liability to some small company that's going to go bankrupt, but that we create a system of accountability that is in place to be able to do that. We also need to do things like divest our state pension funds from fossil fuels. We need to hold our financial institutions accountable, and we need to create basically a system that holds our corporate interests accountable and starts to put that money back into our communities so that we can begin to make that fundamental transformation that is needed to meet the timeline of the climate crisis.
I would begin with restructuring the tax incentives, which subsidize the fossil fuel industry. You know, those subsidies go on forever. And what happens with the renewable tax credits? They have limited time frames. So we need to change that, flip it on its head, and we need to redirect the federal resources to renewable energy and regenerative agriculture. We need to recognize that our land can both sustain us and feed us and help solve the climate crisis. And New Mexico could be at the forefront of that. I already talked about my own land that we are preparing for regenerative agriculture, but go to the farmer's market and buy in small scale from those people whose cultivation of the land and the earth is both feeding us and pulling carbon out of the air. I would treat climate disruption as a national security threat and enlist our local labs to refocus their efforts to research and innovation in addressing the climate crisis. I would co-sponsor the legislation that exists that Deb Haaland and others are pushing. And I would work really hard to have us understand. I think in the heartland, they're starting to see the effects of the climate crisis. They cannot deny it any longer. If you drive across the heartland now, you'll see that where there should be corn planted, they look like they are rice paddies because the climate crisis is impacting the heartland, and hopefully they will start impacting their hearts, and they will also see that joining in this effort is in their best interest as well.
Again, I would really focus on investing in clean new technologies, providing a proper infrastructure to do so, and also protect New Mexico and our economy as we move forward. I think that in addition to all of that, what we can do is create new curriculums in our school systems, both high school, junior colleges, and colleges, so that we can start training and educating individuals on these new technologies. Also, providing more jobs with that infrastructure expansion will be very helpful to New Mexico, which then we can invest in recruiting more healthcare workers and services, because we're going to start to have those populations grow, which then allows us to stimulate the economy and bring in services that we otherwise didn't have. This is a perfect example with veteran services, where you have the VA and individuals who are having to drive 3 to 4 hours for an appointment. You know, these individuals have dedicated their lives to this country and have put their lives on the line. And we need to provide them services and proper services as a result of what they did for us. So it has a huge ripple effect when you really address the issues, not only just with the climate, but also economy, healthcare, veteran services, education funding, infrastructure funding. So that's the type of legislation that I would work on in Congress.
Climate crisis is an inherently multi-generational issue. As a politician, what legacy do you want to leave for us youth? And what do you believe your responsibility is to those that will come after you?
Well, as district attorney, I really hope to leave the legacy of a progressive prosecutor who wants to bring compassion into the criminal justice system. As I mentioned in the earlier opening remarks, I have focused my position on diverting people out of the criminal justice system into treatment facilities and into programs that help them resolve their addiction issue, but also bring them back into the community, stop stigmatizing them as criminals, and addressing this health concern, because it really is a health concern that we're dealing with here. As a future congressman, I hope to leave a legacy of pragmatism, fairness, and transparency. As I mentioned with dark money early on in these questions, we need to, if we're going to say something, if we're going to say, we are against Citizens United, then we can't then follow up and say, well, I'm going to accept all this dark money and just claim that I don't know about it. That's not, that's what we've seen in politics, and that's what we don't want more of. What we want is individuals who are willing to hold themselves accountable. And I hope that that's the legacy I will leave, is that I'm level-headed, but I held myself accountable, and I didn't change based on the money and on just getting the money for the sake of trying to win, but doing it the right way.
So the climate crisis and the situation that we are in now is absolutely a multi-generational issue. And let's be clear, we are only in the situation that we're in now because our leaders of the past have failed to act. And that failure is a direct result of corporate and personal greed that exists. It involves money in politics and the way that the fossil fuel industry is perhaps the largest and most powerful lobbying group that has ever existed in the history of the world. We have got to break those relationships up if we want to make lasting change on this issue. And now we're at this point where the timeline is incredibly short. So as a father, I spend a lot of time thinking about the world that my kids are going to inherit. And that has got to drive our decision-making going forward, is what tools and opportunities are we going to leave future generations, and what are the burdens that we are basically thrusting upon them by our failure to act. And so that starts with, I think, approaching this not in these sort of policy silos anymore, but this broad approach where we've got to look fundamentally at the inequities of the system and the way that neo-colonial policies of deregulation and open markets have exploited those inequities and brought us to the point of this collapse. So we need to not sort of make this incremental change. We need fundamental change at the root cause of these issues to leave our planet in a position for future generations to inherit.
I feel that I must apologize to you, to my children, and to their children, because my generation, has failed you. I sat in the audience at the Green New Deal town hall over a year ago, where the young woman who is a better speechwriter than all of us, right, with the Global Emergency Express, made us cry because she pointed a finger and said, "What have you done? What are you leaving for me?" And I agree with that. So what I want to do is take whatever action I can now, and as forcefully and as boldly and with as much heart and passion as I can. And I commit to you that that's what I will do. That's why in the very first line, I always say we need to protect this beautiful place we call home, because we want it to look like it does now. We want to be able to recognize the fragility of the land in New Mexico, but then those verdant river valleys that have fed us and sustained us. That I want my children to be able to have their children playing in a acequia like mine got to. But right now I'm pointing up to the mountains. There is not enough snow on those mountains right now. We're not getting enough snow. We're not getting what we need to sustain us. And so, yes, I believe that I have a responsibility. And then I have a responsibility to allow you to come and be part of the discussion, to be part of solution, because you are going to be bringing an energy that we don't have. You are going to be bringing an idealism that we don't have. And you are going to be bringing a vision that we don't have. And that vision needs to become part of our vision. So I welcome your input and your guidance on this.
Now, please share your closing statement.
So I want to thank Yucca again for hosting this forum and for all the work that you do creating accountability not only in this election, but in our political systems and processes within this state. It is incredibly important. I am running for office not only because of the urgency of the timeline with respect to the climate crisis, but because of the opportunity that exists for us to fundamentally change the way politics works in this country and in this state, and to transform the structures that have caused these crises in the first place. We have got to build that movement for change from the ground up, and they've got to be premised fundamentally on the principles of justice and equity, looking at the way our systems have created and expanded the inequities that exist, and the way that neo-colonial policies of deregulation and free markets have further exploited the communities and the individuals who are already most vulnerable. So we need to transform how we take care of people in this country, and we need to rebuild the fabric of our society from the ground up. That's how we make change, but it's also how we build prosperity within our communities so that young people are not given the choice or forced into the choice of moving to cities like Albuquerque for economic opportunity, but are able to earn livings and to build prosperity within our communities. We need the fundamental transformation of our system to be able to do that. That's why I'm in this election. Please reach out with any additional questions. I invite you to take a look at our campaign's website, tisdaleforcongress.com. And again, I thank you for all the work that you do and the opportunity to win your vote in this election. Thank you so much.
So once again, I'm Teresa Ledger Fernandez. I won 42% of the vote at the pre-primary convention. I did this because we motivated, mobilized, and energized people who showed up for me in a campaign that is based on the idea that we must take bold and courageous action to protect what we love. That when we act from a place of love, we can do great things and protect our planet, our communities, our most vulnerable, our most disadvantaged, because we recognize that love is the most powerful motivating force. I've received endorsements from those organizations that care about the issues that will make our community stronger. The Latino Victory Fund, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and Emily's List want to elect more Latinas to Congress who will fight for these communities and for women's health. The Sierra Club, as I noted, sees me as their environmental champion in this race. The New Mexico Adelante Caucus endorsed me because we must always go forward and never backward. Taos News, the Santa Fe Reporter, I loved what the Santa Fe Reporter said. They said we had mounted one of the most inspiring campaigns they had seen, that they recognized in me that I made the argument for understanding the district needs across the intersectional spectrums of race, poverty, and gender. New Mexicans' endorsement said that it was my life's trajectory of accomplishment and excellence that demonstrates that I would work to making things better for our communities. I'd help them reach our goals, including the goal of protecting our planet. My campaign is New Mexican powered. New Mexicans want to see me succeed. This enthusiasm, this inspiring kind of campaign and commitment to our communities is what will take me to victory. I would ask that you go to teresaforall.com, that you join me in this effort, and that you send to Congress the next and first Latina from this district.
As district attorney, I've been on the front lines of the opioid epidemic, and as a candidate, I've been on the front lines of this COVID-19 pandemic, addressing the issues head on, because that's what I was brought up to do and to believe, that lifting up your community is the best cause that somebody can take. Also, I am the first candidate who called for impeachment, even when it wasn't politically proper at the time. You have Teresa Ledger and Valerie Plame, who they were actually agreeing with Pelosi at the time in the leadership in not going for impeachment. And then once she changed her mind, well, they followed suit and came out in favor of impeachment. Why? The reason I say that is because you want a leader who's willing to make those tough decisions because it's the right thing to do. I read the Mueller report and I saw that our president was culpable. Knowing that the Senate was going to make a mockery of the system, we still needed to hold him accountable, not only for people here in the United States, but also for the rest of the world. Because guess what? They just see him as a bully who's not even supporting our allies when they need it the most. We're losing a lot of credibility on the world stage, and this is something that we really need to address. In addition, I am the only candidate holding myself accountable for you all with position papers, detailed position papers, because you need to know as voters where your candidate stands and why. And if I change my messaging, you get to see it. Similar to the candidate that I've mentioned who's taking black money, who is in favor of doing away with Citizens United and is now taking dark money. So my name is Marco Cerna. I would appreciate your support. I hope to earn your vote. MarcoForCongress.com. Thank you for having us, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you all so much for all your responses, and thank you to all our voters for tuning in and staying engaged. Early voting has started in New Mexico, and most absentee ballots have been mailed to voters around the state. Before you fill out your ballot and send it to the county clerk and head to the polls on June 2nd, please check out our Climate Voters Guide at yuccaaction.org. To learn more about where these and other candidates running for office in New Mexico stand on climate. We need to get out the vote. Join us for the series of phone banking events in the next 2 weeks leading up to the election. You can sign up at www.yuccaaction.org. www.yuccaaction.org. Thank you so much again to the candidates and the viewers. Stay safe, everyone.